When people talk about vanishing towns or places that don't exist on a map, it's easy to write them off as urban legends or ghost stories passed around a campfire. But I'm telling you right now, I lived in one. Not for long, but certainly long enough. My name's David Green. When I was 26, my Uncle Eli passed away and left me his house, 5 acres of land in a town I never heard of, Denslow, Pennsylvania. I was living in Philadelphia at the time, scraping by after a breakup and getting burned out from my job at a design firm. The inheritance felt like an escape hatch. I figured I'd drive out there, fix the place up, maybe sell it and use the money to get back on my feet. I didn't plan to stay, but Denslow had other ideas. The first strange thing was the drive itself. After I passed the last recognizable town, I think it was, the GPS flaked out. The road signs got fewer and more faded. I stopped seeing cars. The asphalt narrowed to gravel, then dirt. Trees pressed in tight from both sides, like the woods were reclaiming the road. It was around dusk when I finally reached the town. Welcome to Denslow was painted in hand-brush lettering on a weather-beaten sign. Half hidden by weeds, population 223. That number would haunt me later. The town looked like it had been plucked from the 1950s and left to marinate in fog and moss. There was a diner, a general store, a gas station with rotary pumps, and houses spaced out on wide lots. People were outside watching me drive in, just standing, not waving, not smiling, just watching. I chalked it up to small-town curiosity. After all, I was the outsider. Uncle Eli's house sat 2 miles past the edge of town, down a wooded trail barely wide enough for my car. It was a 2-story farmhouse, old but solid, still had furniture inside. The power worked. There were even cans of food in the cupboards. The first couple of nights were uneventful, if unsettling. It was quiet in a way that made my ears ring. No hum of cars, no sirens, not even crickets, just complete silence, broken occasionally by creaking trees or the wind slipping through the eaves. It was on the 3rd night when I noticed the sound. At first I thought it was the house settling, a dull, rhythmic thud like footsteps on hardwood. But the sound didn't come from inside. It came from outside, moving around the house, slow and deliberately. I got up and peeked out the windows, but the porch light only showed fog and trees. Nothing moved. The next morning I checked for footprints, mud maybe, animal tracks, but the ground was undisturbed and clean. I brushed it off. Isolation plays tricks on you. I kept working on the house, painting, hauling trash, trimming brush. Every so often, I'd drive into town for supplies. That's when things started getting weirder. There was no internet. The phones were landline only, and even then, they buzzed with static. When I asked about cell service, the clerk at the general store, a pale woman with silver hair pinned back in a tight bun, just said, "Oh, we don't get much of that out here." They didn't take credit cards either, cash only, and no ATM. I ended up bartering some of my tools just to buy food, but it was the people that really got to me. They were polite, yes, too polite, overly formal, like they were pretending to be people. They'd ask strange questions like, "You sleep okay out there? Heard any footsteps yet? You ever hear the trees whisper your name?" The first time someone said that last one, I laughed thinking it was a joke. The man didn't laugh back. He just stared at me, then turned and walked off. Every person in town looked tired, but not in a normal way. More like their faces had forgotten how to relax. Their eyes stayed wide too long. They didn't blink enough. I started counting how long they'd go without blinking. Some for up to 40, 50 seconds. One woman in the diner never blinked once during our 10-minute conversation. At some point I realized I was avoiding town altogether. I'd ration canned food and stay out at the house. I didn't even like looking out the windows anymore, because the footsteps had returned. Every night, always around 2 a.m., first the soft thuds, like bare feet on damp earth, then a sound like breathing, raspy, shallow, almost mechanical. I'd shine a flashlight through the windows and see nothing, but one night, I did see something. It was just beyond the tree line, a silhouette tall and still. Not an animal, too long-limbed, too upright. When I raised the light to it, The shape didn't move. I stared at it for what felt like an hour. Then I blinked and it was gone. I stopped sleeping after that. I tried calling someone, anyone, but the phone lines didn't connect, just static. Even the radio only picked up one station. It played old-timey music, like from a wax cylinder, interspersed with dead air and whispers I couldn't quite understand. Eventually, I drove back to town, planning to confront someone, ask what was going on. But when I got there was no town. The sign was gone, the buildings, gone. Just trees, the road, a dead end. I turned around, heart pounding, trying to retrace my path, but every direction led to more woods. No trail, no gravel, just forest that seemed to fold in on itself. I remember screaming. I remember punching the steering wheel until my knuckles bled. Then, I remember silence. I don't know how long I stayed out there. The days blurred. I'd wake up and find the house slightly different. A window open that I'd closed, furniture moved, a chair placed just a little closer to the bed. I'd hear voices through the walls, speaking in flat tones like recordings. My uncle's journals would appear on the table, open to pages I hadn't read. He'd written, "If you're reading this, you need to leave. But you can't, not the normal way. The woods keep you. The town changes. It doesn't want to be found." One night, I decided to make a run for it. Not by road, just straight through the trees. I packed what I could in a backpack and started hiking west, using the setting sun as a guide. I walked for 2 days. On the third morning, I stumbled out of the woods onto a gravel shoulder. A passing car screeched to a halt, and a woman got out, calling 911. I tried to explain. The police listened, but the map showed nothing. No Denslow, no house, no Eli Green, no property under my name. The deed was gone. My license still had my Philadelphia address, like it had all been erased. They told me I'd had some kind of breakdown, suggested stress, isolation, maybe a psychotic episode. But I remember everything. And here's the part that still keeps me up at night. 2 months later, back in the city, I got a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph, a faded Polaroid of me, standing in front of the diner in Denslow, surrounded by the townspeople. Their eyes were all wide, blank, and unblinking. On the back, written in ink that had bled into the paper, it wrote, "You blinked. We didn't." I moved to Carter Hollow for peace. Funny how often that word becomes a lie. Back in 2019, I took a job maintaining substations and power lines for a rural stretch of Pennsylvania. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid decently. And after a messy divorce and too many sleepless nights in Harrisburg, I was more than ready to leave the city noise behind. Carter Hollow didn't look like anything special. Just a small grid of narrow streets, old houses, sagging front porches, and overgrown lots. About 300 people, one gas station, one bar, one post office, and a grocery store that still used handwritten price tags. The rental I moved into sat at the edge of town near a forest preserve. 2 bedrooms, fireplace, wraparound porch. It was quiet, all right. Real quiet. No highway rumble, no sirens. Just wind and crickets, the occasional freight train in the distance. I remember thinking the first week I might actually stay here. That was before I started hearing them. The first report came from a woman on Hickory Road. Said she'd been hearing barking at night, long, low howls, followed by something she described as snarling laughter. I figured it was a coyote pack. It happens. But when I checked the power junction outside her property, I noticed her trash bins had been dragged into the woods, not knocked over, dragged 30 feet from her porch. One had deep gouges in it, like claws. She was gone the next day. No goodbye, no moving truck, no note. The front door was still open when a neighbor checked on her. Her coffee was cold on the table. No one ever found her dog. The sheriff's report said inconclusive. The town shrugged it off. She probably left, they said. Something about that bothered me. She wasn't the kind to just leave. I'd spoken to her twice. Nervous woman, always clutching her dog's leash. She told me once the woods made her feel watched. Now, I knew what she meant. The howling started near my place not long after, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. First one voice, low and distant, then another. Sometimes it grew into a full chorus that echoed off the hills, warping in pitch like a siren made at death. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the kind of fear that made your skin feel too tight. I'd walk through the house with my shotgun and flashlight shining out the windows, but nothing, always nothing. Then things escalated. One night I found tracks circling my porch, dozens of them, some large, dog-like paw prints. Others looked wrong, like feet but misshapen, too long, too narrow. One had toes. Another time, I woke to the sound of heavy breathing outside my bedroom window, close enough to fog the glass. That's when I nailed plywood over it. I started asking around town casually. I expected people to laugh or shake their heads. Instead, I got silence. One guy, Eddie from the auto shop, just said, "Don't go into the woods." Another guy, real estate agent named Neil, told me, "There's strays around. You'll get used to it." But their eyes told me otherwise. They looked tired and haunted. And when I pressed further, the answers stopped completely. People weren't scared of what was happening. They were scared of talking about it. By the new year, I'd stopped sleeping through the night. I kept the shotgun loaded, put floodlights around the house, locked all doors before sunset, but it didn't matter. One night, I came home late after repairing a transformer upstate. As I pulled into the driveway, my headlights caught something standing in front of my porch. It was a dog, sort of. It was too tall, its back was arched, limbs stiff and unnatural. Mangy fur clung to its bones. One eye glowed in the light, the other was milky white. Its jaw hung slack, revealing rows of sharp, uneven teeth. Not like a wild dog, like something copied one badly. I braked hard. The thing didn't flinch. It just stared. Then two more appeared from the side, crawling on all fours, bodies twitching like broken puppets. One walked sideways. I honked. They didn't move. I hit the gas and drove straight at them. They scattered into the dark, but not like animals. They walked upright for a second, then dropped again and vanished into the brush. After that night, I stayed armed. I even installed bars on my windows. I asked the sheriff about it. Sheriff Donnelly was a man built like a stove, big belly, wide face, no nonsense. He sipped his coffee and said, "You hearing about the dogs now?" I nodded. "Leave your porch light on. They don't like bright light. And if you ever hear them at the windows, don't answer. They know how to trick you." I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head. "You stay quiet. That's how you stay alive." He paused before walking away and added, "And don't go near the old cabin off Miller's Path. That's where they come from." You'd think I'd have listened, but I needed answers. The next day I took my truck out towards Miller's Path, following a hunting trail deep into the woods. I brought the shotgun, 3 flares, and my dog, Buckshot, a black lab with more guts than sense. The forest swallowed us. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of frost and the quiet hush of snowflakes falling. The cabin appeared like a scar among the trees. Weathered logs, broken chimney, roof half caved in. Buckshot growled low the second we saw it. There were bones around the cabin, not deer, dogs. Skulls with cracked jaws, femurs chewed clean. A collar hung from a nail over the doorframe. Inside, the place reeked, like rot and wet fur. Scratch marks covered the walls, dozens, hundreds, like something had been trapped inside, trying to claw its way out. There were words scratched too. We followed him. He called us back. We are still here. They walk in packs, but think in one mind. I didn't stay long. The air felt wrong, heavy and electric. Buckshot refused to go near the door. I grabbed one of the scratched-up collars off a whim and left. But I swear, I heard something following us, all the way back to the truck. 2 nights later, they came. It started with the floodlights going out, all of them, one after another, pop, pop, pop. Then the howling began, surrounding the house, different voices weaving in and out like some sick choir. I bolted the doors, loaded the shotgun, got Buckshot inside. I pulled a chair up near the front window and waited. And then I saw them. Dozens of them moving low through the yard. Some ran, others crawled. One stood on 2 legs for nearly a full minute. Their eyes glowed like brake lights. Their mouths hung wide, dripping. Some looked like dead dogs. Others looked like people who turned wrong. They circled, growled. One jumped at the window and scratched hard and long. Slow drags that squealed like nails on glass. Then I heard it. My mother's voice. "David, it's cold out here. Let me in." She'd been dead for 10 years. Another voice came from the back door. My ex-girlfriend, Emma. "You left me, remember? Open up." I clamped my hands over my ears. Buckshot barked wildly, spinning in place. The scratching grew louder. Wood cracked, windows creaked. I fired one flare through the window into the yard. Screams, not yelps. Screams. They weren't just burned. They were offended by the light. Furious. They fled, vanishing into the trees. It's been 6 months since then. I don't live in Carter Hollow anymore. No one would buy the house. It's still sitting there, empty and rotting. People drive by and report weird shapes in the yard. One guy said he saw a dog walking on its hind legs, chewing on a mailbox. I live 2 states over now, near people, near traffic, near noise. I keep the lights on all night, and I keep buckshot close. And some nights, I still hear them. Far off, a howl that drops into a growl, then rises into something that sounds like a laugh. I never go near the woods. I never open the door after midnight. And I never answer when someone outside calls my name. You don't move to a place like Gull's Rest unless you're running from something. For me, it was a ruined relationship, a burned-out career, and a growing sense that something in my life had quietly died while I wasn't paying attention. I didn't even plan on ending up there. I've been driving up the Maine coast for days, staying at sketchy motels, living on gas station coffee and the occasional handful of trail mix. I didn't even know Gull's Rest existed until I saw the sign. Established 1812, population 417. I turned off the highway and drove into town like I was being pulled. The streets were empty. The houses all looked like they belonged in an old photograph. Gray siding, rusting shutters, paint flaking like dead skin. Fog clung to the roads like it didn't want to leave. The air smelled like salt and mold, but it was quiet. It was still. It felt like the world had hit pause. I stopped at the diner. It was almost empty inside. One waitress and one man in a booth staring into his coffee. I asked the waitress if there were any short-term rentals nearby. She didn't blink, just said, "Room above the bait shop. Keys behind the counter. $40 a week. Cash only." I should have taken that as a sign. The room wasn't much. Dusty, slanted floors, weak plumbing, but the view was what sold me. From the small window beside the bed, I could see the ocean beyond the black, jagged rocks. A strip of sand that never looked dry. And out there, on a cliff point, rising like a broken finger, was the old lighthouse. Tall, white, faint rust bleeding down one side. A black-capped dome at the top, surrounded by a narrow railing. No boats out there, no seagulls, nothing but that lighthouse standing alone like it had been forgotten. On my first night in town, I sat by the window with a beer and watched it. Just watched. Around 1 a.m., a pale flicker of light cut the fog. Then it rotated. On, off, on again. But the town didn't have an active lighthouse. That was the first thing Curtis, the bait shop guy, had told me when I checked in. Lighthouse hasn't been used since the 90s. Power got cut. Bed said it was a hazard. But I was staring at it. Working. Turning. Alive. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I stayed up every night that week. Each time between midnight and 2, the light would appear like a slow, watchful eye. On the 5th night, I decided to walk to it. I looked up, used old maps to find an unmarked trail that ran along the sea cliffs. It was barely passable. Roots, mud, collapsed fencing. The deeper I went, the more the air changed. It smelled of brine and something else, something sour, like wet books and old breath. After about an hour, I reached the edge of the bluff where the lighthouse stood. The gate was open, and the chain had rusted through. The lighthouse loomed above me, its base coated in algae and barnacles, stairs crumbling at the edges. Yet, despite the despair, the door was intact, painted black and freshly scratched, deep gouges in the wood, like fingernails or claws. I hesitated and listened. Somewhere inside, I swore I heard something, a slow creak, like someone shifting their weight, and breathing, not labored or rushed, just there. I turned around and walked back to town. After that, I started asking questions. I started slow and careful. The waitress at the diner looked uncomfortable when I mentioned the lighthouse. "Oh, that thing? It's condemned. You better off not poking around up there." Curtis, the bait shop guy, just shook his head. "Look, folks here don't talk about the lighthouse. You'd be smart to do the same." An old man sitting on the bench outside the post office overheard me one afternoon and called me over with a crook of his finger. "You seen the light yet?" I nodded. "Don't look too long, and don't go back. He doesn't like being watched." "He?" The man gave a rattling laugh. Then he leaned in and whispered, "They say the sea didn't take him. He just stayed. A man named Calhoun. Keeper long after the tower went dark. Folks say he still climbs the stairs every night, walks the rail, waits for something." I asked him what he meant by waits, for what, but he just stared at me and said, "You'll find out. Everyone who sees the light does." It was a week before I went back. Something about it pulled me. Each night I tried to ignore it, but the sound of that light turning, mechanical, ancient, haunted my sleep. This time, I went during the day. Inside, the lighthouse was worse than I remembered. Black mold spread like veins up the walls. The spiral staircase groaned with every step. Dust coated every surface, but there were footprints, clear ones going upward, and I followed. At the top, I found the lantern room. The huge glass dome was intact, but smudged from the inside, like someone had pressed their hand and face against it repeatedly. There was no power, no wiring, no source of light. But on the table beside the central lamp was a ledger, a journal, and I opened it. March 12th, light turned again. I didn't touch it. It's not mine anymore. March 17th, something came in through the lower door. I bared the stairwell. March 25th, it waits in the walls now. Pretends to be wind, pretends to be sea, but I know better. I flipped through pages and pages, years of entries in the same frantic scrawl, mentions of visitors who shouldn't have come, of voices calling up the tower, of things slithering down the spiral at night, and one phrase repeated again and again: "The sea brought it here. The light keeps it in." I backed away from the table. Then I heard the steps, slow, deliberate, coming up from below. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, and the steps stopped. Then I saw his shadow stretching up from the stairwell, a crooked silhouette, hunched, limbs just slightly too long, one arm twitching, and a voice rose from the dark. "I thought you'd come sooner." It wasn't angry or even surprised, just expectant. "You've been watching," it said. "Just like me." A foot came into view, bare, leathery, gray, toenails cracked. I bolted. I didn't stop running until I reached town. That night, I locked every door, closed the curtains, sat in the dark with a bat and a bottle of whiskey, my heart pounding. At 1:42 a.m., the lighthouse lit up again. Only this time, the light didn't stay on the sea. It turned toward town. I watched it sweep across the hills, the trees, the dock, and stop on my building. The window glowed with pale yellow light, and I saw him, standing outside, not knocking, just watching. His face pale and sagging like wet parchment. His lips moved, but I heard nothing, only the sound of waves in my ears. I blinked, and he was gone. The next morning, I didn't pack. I didn't say goodbye. I just drove until the coast was a memory. But I never really left Gull's Rest. Not completely. Sometimes I still hear the clang of the light turning. Sometimes I smell salt on the wind when I'm nowhere near the ocean. And last week, I got a letter with no return address. Inside was a single torn page. April 3rd, the light went off again. I don't know how long I've been here, but I think it wants someone new. Folded in the page was a photograph, old and faded. Me standing on the base of the lighthouse. Only, I've never seen that photo before, never stood that close. And in the window above, near the top of the tower, someone's watching. They say power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. But I lived in East Sundown long enough to know that's not true. Sometimes power rots. Sometimes it grows like mold, slowly enough that no one notices until the walls are soft, and the ceiling sag and the whole house is just waiting to collapse. My name's Aaron, and I was the town's newspaper editor for 5 years, until the paper shut down. My house was condemned, and half the town pretended they never heard of me. This is the story I promised I'd never write, and if you're reading this, it probably means I finally ran out of places to hide. Now, let me take you back. East Sundown, population just under 1,900, was nestled in the woods near the edge of the state. No interstates, no big box stores, no chains of any kind. People either stayed their whole lives or left and never came back. I was one of the idiots who came back. My dad ran the town's paper for 30 years. When he died, I left a decent job in Seattle and moved back to take over the Sundown Centennial. I told myself it'd be temporary, a year maybe, just long enough to sort through his things and keep the paper running. But East Sundown had a way of pulling you in. Everything felt like it was coded in memory. Cracked sidewalks I used to ride my bike on, the burnt-out corner store that still smelt faintly of motor oil and lemon drops, the sound of frogs by the lake at night. Nostalgia is a real drug. And then there was Mayor Charles Griggs. Griggs had been mayor for longer than I'd been alive. 60-something years old, trim, gray-suited every day of the year. He spoke like a preacher and moved like a salesman, smiled with too many teeth. People loved him, the older folks especially. Charlie's done so much for this town, they'd say. Brought back jobs, keeps crime down, never raised taxes. But the more time I spent digging into the paper's archives, the more questions I had. Griggs had been re-elected 6 times. Never a challenger, never a campaign, just automatic renewals, like a subscription nobody bothered to cancel. I started looking into the town's budget reports. Something was off. Year after year, tens of thousands in special project funds with no clear recipient. Public records requests went unanswered. And then there were the disappearances. They weren't frequent. One every couple years. Never high profile. A drifter. A teenager who just turned 18. A guy who talked too much at town hall meetings. They'd vanish. No bodies, no investigations. People would just shake their heads and say, "Must have left town." But what kind of town keeps losing people who never tell anyone they're leaving? One evening, after I printed a piece about the mayor's missing records, I came home to find my front door open. Nothing was stolen, but my office was trashed, my notes scattered, every drawer pulled open. The only thing missing was an envelope full of statements from ex-town employees who'd agreed to talk off the record. I reported it, but no one came. The next morning, I got a call from Mayor Griggs himself. Said he wanted to talk. Said I should come by his house, not the town hall. Quieter there, he said. More comfortable. I should have said no. The mayor lived on Willow Drive, in a large colonial surrounded by trimmed hedges and security lights. When I arrived, he answered the door with a grin and a glass of iced tea. "Come on in, son. Let's chat." The living room was spotless. No family photos, no clutter, just a ticking grandfather clock and the faint smell of bleach. Griggs led me into a study lined with old books and trophies from decades of civic awards. He poured me a drink, but I didn't touch it. "You've been busy," he said, looking out the window. "Just doing my job," I replied. He nodded slowly. "This town doesn't do well with disruption, Aaron. People like things the way they are." Then he turned and stared at me, with something behind his smile. "You should drop the story. You're not going to like what you find." I asked him what he meant. "I mean," he said, stepping closer, "some things are better off buried." He reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope, handed it to me. It was the one taken from my office. "You left this unlocked," he said. "Might want to be more careful." After that meeting, things only got worse. My phone buzzed all night with unknown numbers. When I answered, there'd be nothing but static or breathing. Someone followed me to the grocery store. I saw them again at the post office. Same gray coat, same wide hat, always just far enough away not to call out. Then the paper got a letter from the town council. Our lease was being terminated. The building needed urgent repairs, and 2 days later the power was cut. Then my brakes failed. I'd been driving to a friend's place in the next county, trying to get away for the weekend as I came down the winding road near Sawmill Bridge. The pedal sank to the floor. I managed to swerve into a ditch. No serious injuries, just a concussion and a shoulder sprain. The mechanic said someone had tampered with the lines. That was the moment I stopped playing nice. With help from a guy who used to work maintenance at City Hall, I learned about an old file storage room beneath the courthouse. Not on the blueprints, no public access, and he gave me a key. That night, I snuck in through the service entrance, found the stairs behind a locked panel, and descended into darkness. The air was damp, and the walls smelled like mold and rotting wood. The records were there, floor to ceiling. Boxes full of handwritten reports, expense ledgers, medical files, some dating back to the 1950s. I stayed for hours, flipping through whatever I could. One box was labeled adjustment candidates. Inside were photos, young men and women, their names scrawled on the back in red ink. Some matched the missing persons I noted months ago. One was the waitress from the diner who'd quit suddenly. Another was my high school classmate Ryan, who vanished in 2009. But there were also files still marked active. One of them had my name on it. I left town that night. Didn't go home, didn't even go back for my laptop. I drove west with nothing but a duffel bag and a box of photocopied documents. That was 3 years ago, and I've been moving ever since. Every time I settle down for more than a few weeks, something weird happens. A note under my door, a car that follows me 3 blocks before vanishing, my dame disappearing from local mail records. Always subtle, always just enough to remind me that Mayor Griggs is still out there, still watching, still running East Sundown like a kingdom no one's allowed to leave. And he's not just a man anymore, he's something worse, a man who knows he can get away with anything, because no one's ever stopped him. I heard the light turned off in the library last year, the one that always burned through the night. They say no one's seen the librarian since. They say Griggs is starting to look younger, that his gray is fading, that he hasn't aged a day in years. I don't know what kind of power he has, but I know it's rooted in that town. I know it feeds off silence, off people pretending not to notice, off of fear. So this is me not being silent. If I disappear after posting this, don't believe what they say. I didn't run, I didn't get tired, and I sure didn't go back to East Sundown. I moved to Halberd, Nebraska to disappear. The kind of town no one outside the county line could point to on a map. No chain stores, no nightclubs, just a gas station and a bar that doubled as a diner, and 3 churches fighting over the same congregation. I was a high school teacher for 10 years before I burned out. Too many kids with dead eyes, too many parents who didn't care. One day I packed up, drove west, and kept going until the map turned beige and the roads got narrow enough to feel like veins. Halberd felt like a place that time had forgotten. I didn't know yet that it had forgotten something on purpose. I'd been in town 3 weeks when I saw him the first time. It was at a gas station on Route 6, the only one for miles. I was standing in line behind him, mid-50s, maybe older, gray coat, clean shaven but with that waxy, weathered skin you'd only get from being outside too long. He kept tapping his fingers on the counter in perfect rhythm. When the clerk asked him a question, he stared a little too long before answering, like he was translating it in his head. I didn't think much of it at the time. Drifters passed through every now and then. But later that night, when I was at the Rusty Nail eating overcooked chicken and fried steak, he walked in again. Same coat, same face, same tapping fingers. Only this time, he ordered in a perfect southern drawl and laughed like he'd lived there forever. Everyone in the bar greeted him like an old friend. They called him Eli. I didn't say anything until the 3rd time I saw him. It was a week later, at the small-town flea market they ran out of the fire station garage. Eli stood behind a table full of rusted tools and antique radios, chatting up the local preacher like they'd gone to school together. But here's the thing. He looked younger. Less gray, straighter posture, his skin tighter and smoother. I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, different lighting, wishful thinking. But when he turned and looked at me, I felt it in my gut. He recognized me, not from here, not from now. He gave a small nod, not friendly, but not threatening, just acknowledgement. Like we were both in on something neither of us had agreed to. I started asking around about him. Every person I talked to had a different memory of Eli. Miss Cartwright, who ran the library, said he used to be a teacher back in the 70s. Real smart man, polite. Bit odd, just vanished one day. A rancher at the bar claimed Eli had fought in Korea. Came back quiet. Real quiet. Another man swore up and down that Eli helped build the grain in the 50s. Different versions, different decades. Same face. Same gray coat. Same. It was around midnight when I finally confronted him. I couldn't sleep. Something about him unraveling my brain. So I drove to the edge of town where the grain elevators cast long shadows over the fields. That's where I saw him. Sitting on the hood of a car, staring up at the stars like they owed him something. I parked and walked over, trying to keep my voice steady. You've been here before? He didn't look away from the sky. Hundreds of times. His voice was calm and sad almost. Sometimes I come back earlier, sometimes later. Depends on how it all shakes out. How what shakes out? The collapse, he said softly. Of time, of choices and memory. Every time I fix one thing, another cracks. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it just burst out of me. You're telling me you're a time traveler? He looked at me then. Really looked. And there was no madness in his eyes. Just exhaustion. No, I'm telling you I'm a time prisoner. I didn't believe him. Not fully. Not until he left a box on my doorstep. Inside was a leather journal, worn smooth from handling. Pages filled with frantic writing. 1927. I arrive. The barn fire hasn't happened yet. I must stop it. 1945. Failure. Mr. Harrow's son is still dead. I cannot alter his grief. 1962. The boy disappears again. My words do not reach him. Dozens of entries, each labeled with dates, attempts, failures. He wasn't just coming back. He was repeating, reliving. Every version of this town had a tragedy, a vanishing, a fire, a suicide. He was trying to stop them, and failing, every time. Sometimes he came too early, sometimes too late. Sometimes no one remembered him at all. After that, I started seeing cracks. Not in the walls, in reality. A little girl walked past me twice in the same street in the same dress, 10 minutes apart, saying the same thing. A dog barked 3 times, exactly 3, at exactly 2:03 p.m., every day for a week. One morning, the town square was briefly lined with campaign signs for a mayor who died 3 years ago. They were gone by noon. Nobody else noticed, or if they did, they pretended not to. I found old photos in the library archives, black and white prints of the town fair, or the schoolhouse being built. Eli's face was in all of them, sometimes blurred, sometimes clear, always watching, like he'd been embedded in the fabric of this place. I saw him one last time. It was dusk. I was driving the back roads near the cornfields when I found his car, still running, empty, parked at the edge of a ditch. I followed the muddy footprints across the fields to the woods, and there he was, standing beside a large stone maker, half buried in moss, carved into it. Here stood Halberd, 1910 to 2023. It's coming, he said. What is? He turned. This town always dies. Fire, flood, sickness, war. It doesn't matter. Something swallows it whole. I've tried to stop it, but the threads snap every single time. So why come back? He looked at me like I'd asked the one question he feared, because I don't remember choosing to. And then he vanished. Not in a flash of light, not in a puff of smoke. Just gone. One blink he was there, the next, only air. That was 2 months ago. And now the town is changing again. People are forgetting things. Whole streets vanish from memory. The gas station's been closed for years, but I filled up there this morning. A kid told me her grandmother hasn't aged since the 4th of July parade last year. Some nights I wake up and see flickers of light in the sky. Not stars, not planes, just something folding above us. I found Eli's coat on my porch yesterday. Inside was a note. You'll try next. I don't know what that means, but I feel it in my bones. Something is ending, or beginning, or looping again. And I can't tell which. I never believed a man could set a whole town on fire until I moved to Greeley. I came out here in the spring of 2022, chasing quiet after a few too many years of noise. I'd burned out on city life, lost my job at the architecture firm, and inherited a small fixer-upper in Greeley from my aunt who passed unexpectedly. It seemed like a chance to reset. Greeley was the kind of town where everyone still waved, where the corner store sold pie by the slice, and where the fire station was run out of a garage with one ancient truck, a town barely clinging to the edge of relevance. But I noticed it on day one. There were too many empty lots. Spaces where houses used to be, yards that went nowhere, charred concrete pads where nothing had grown back. When I asked my neighbor, old Mr. Pree, what happened to all the houses, he just shook his head and said, "Some towns have termites. We've got fire." He didn't smile when he said it. It happened on Tuesday. The house 3 doors down from mine, vacant, abandoned for years, went up around 2 a.m. I saw the glow through my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was headlights, but then the heat hit, even from that far. I went outside in bare feet with my heart pounding. Flames licked the sky, orange and hungry. The air smelled of gasoline and burnt insulation. By the time the fire truck got there 15 minutes later, the house was already bones. No one said it aloud, but I could see it in their faces. They weren't surprised. The fire chief, a wide-shouldered woman named Loretta, told me they'd seen this kind of thing before. Old wood, dry summer, these houses go quick. But the spring rains had just ended. The wood wasn't dry. The power had been shut off in that house for years, and the fire started inside. Something about it felt intentional. Over the next 6 weeks, 4 more fires burned down 5 more buildings. An old barn, a trailer, a hardware store on the edge of town, and 2 houses that sat empty for years. The sheriff, a man named Taggart, started holding weekly press conferences, saying the fires were likely the result of squatters or faulty wiring. But people in town talked quietly, whispers over coffee, closed-door conversations in the church basement, murmurs of Harlan's back, or sometimes just the fireman. I asked Mr. Prentice again. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the smoking husk of a house across the road and finally said, "Some people don't die, right? They burn, and it ain't enough." Then he went inside and locked the door. I started digging. The old town library had a half-room archive of old newspaper clippings, yellowed, crumbling. I went through a decade's worth of issues and started seeing the pattern. Starting in 1994, there was a fire every year, always in early spring, always late at night. Vacant buildings, barns, abandoned trailers, burned down to their bones. One article stood out, dated 2001. Local man arrested for arson in 3rd fire this year. The mugshot showed a gaunt man with sunken cheeks and eyes too wide for his head. His name was Harlan Deeks. He'd been found squatting in a barn that caught fire the night after. He claimed he didn't light the blaze, said he heard voices in the walls telling him it needed to burn. He was sentenced to a state hospital and transferred. Then nothing. No records after 2003. Completely gone. One night in late April, I woke to a strange sound, like something metal tapping against my front porch. When I peeked out the window, there was no one there, but in the morning I found footprints in the ash from my fire pit, pressed into the wooden steps. Bare feet, long toes. The prints were burnt around the edges, like whatever made them had been smoking. I checked the security camera I'd put up on the porch. The footage was glitchy. At 3:18 a.m., the camera cut out. When it resumed at 3:25, there was a figure standing at the edge of the yard, a tall, thin silhouette, twitching ever so slightly. He didn't move, he just stood there, watching the house. And then, he was gone. The 6th fire took out the old schoolhouse. I was close, too close. I ran to it when I saw the smoke, hoping to help. But when I got there, something was wrong. The fire didn't spread naturally. It moved fast and upward like it was crawling the walls deliberately inside. It wasn't just fire. It was heat like I never felt. Unnatural, as if the flames hated everything they touched. That's when I saw him in the doorway. Harlan. It had to be him. Skin like old leather, slick with sweat, eyes wide, glowing in the firelight. His mouth moved like he was whispering to the flames, and the fire listened. He turned to me, and I swear he smiled, then vanished into the burning hallway. They never found a body. After that, I confronted Loretta and Sheriff Taggart, cornered them in the diner at closing time. I told them it was Harlan, that he was back, that he was lighting fires and feeding them something. They didn't deny it. They just looked tired. We tried to kill him, Taggart said. 30 years ago, after the third fire, we found him in the woods, doused him, lit him up. And he burned, Loretta added, voice flat. But he didn't scream, just laughed. They buried what was left in the junkyard. It rained for 3 days, and the fire stopped until now. We think the land brought him back, she said. The town turned its back, let buildings rot, let memories fade, and he came back in the cracks. He doesn't want people, Taggart said. He wants emptiness, places people forgot. He hates rot and silence. Fire's the only thing that makes him feel. I asked why they never warned anyone. They both looked at me and said, would you have stayed if we did? Last week, I heard footsteps on the roof. Then the scent of gasoline under my window. I went outside with a bat and a flashlight, shaking. My porch was empty, the trees silent. Then I saw the smoke rising from my garage. By the time I got there, the flames had taken hold. But I saw him again, Harlan, inside the fire, moving through it like it parted for him, his hands dragging the walls as he walked, his mouth opening in a soundless scream. And then, just before he vanished, he whispered something that burned itself into my memory. If you leave it empty, I'll fill it. The fire marshal ruled it electrical. The town nodded along. But now I don't light candles. I keep water buckets at every corner. And I don't leave rooms unlit for too long, because I know Harlan's still out there. He's not a man anymore. He's a need, a heat, a reminder that forgetting something doesn't make it go away. If you let it rot too long, something will come to burn it clean. When I moved to Millfield, I wasn't expecting much. Small towns, 2 stoplights, 1 high school, and a gas station that still had the little plastic number signs on the pump. I never heard of it before I got the job offer. It was supposed to be a fresh start. After I got laid off from my last job in the city and ran out of money, I took the first thing I could find. A friend of a friend knew a guy who managed a place called the Lighthouse, a 24-hour diner on the edge of Millfield, just off Route 19. They were always hiring, he said. In hindsight, I should have asked why. The first thing I noticed about the Lighthouse was the smell. It wasn't bad, exactly, just old, like scorched grease, wet pennies, and bleach. The neon open sign never turned off. Even in the middle of the night, someone was always inside. The second thing I noticed was how tired everyone looked. When I showed up for my first shift, the manager, a man named Denny who never made eye contact for more than a second, handed me a pale green apron, a list of rules, and a single warning. Don't go past the walk-in freezer. That area is staff only. I nodded, but something about the way he said staff only didn't sit right. Isn't everyone here staff? I joked. He didn't laugh, just mumbled, not for long, and walked away. My first week went by in a greasy blur of pancakes, coffee refills, and fluorescent lights that flickered more than they should have. That's when Sasha, one of the waitresses, didn't show up. She was young, maybe 19, purple hair, tattoos, always chewing gum. We worked for a few night shifts together, and she always complained about feeling watched when she took orders by the back booths. The night before she disappeared, she told me, "There's something wrong with the freezer door. Sometimes it opens on its own like it's breathing." The next day, she was gone. No one filed a report, and no one seemed surprised. Her locker was emptied within hours. Denny just said she quit, couldn't hack it. But that didn't make sense. She'd just gotten promoted to night shift lead. She told me she needed the money. Then I looked at the staff photo wall near the kitchen. There was Sasha's picture, blurred and faded like it had been there for years, except it had just been taken 2 weeks ago. Over the next month, I started paying attention. 3 more workers disappeared. Lena, the dishwasher, Mark, one of the cooks, Jamal, a guy who'd only been hired a week before. No goodbyes, no calls, no missing posters. Every time, Denny had an excuse. He found something better. She moved to take care of family. He just left. But the town was too small for that many people to disappear without a trace. And none of them had packed up their things. Lena's coat stayed on the hook for a week before someone finally threw it out. Jamal's car sat in the lot until a tow truck took it, and every time someone vanished, the back door near the freezer would be left open until the next morning. I broke the rules on a Tuesday. It was 3:12 a.m., and I just finished cleaning the coffee machine. The restaurant was dead quiet. The other servers were out smoking, and Denny was dozing off in his office with the door cracked. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint and raspy, almost a whisper, coming from behind the freezer door. "Help!" I froze. My stomach turned. I thought it was just a joke at first, maybe the cook screwing around. But when I opened the freezer, there was nothing inside. Just frost, racks of frozen hash browns and deep shadows. But there was another door at the back, metal and unmarked. Something about it was very wrong, not crooked or damaged, just out of place, like it didn't belong in this world. I reached for the handle, and someone grabbed my shoulder. It was Denny. His eyes weren't tired anymore. They were wide and sharp. "You don't go back there," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "That's where they go. The ones who don't belong." I didn't sleep after that. Instead, I started asking questions. The locals didn't like that. They changed the subject, avoid my eyes. One old man at the bar finally gave me a straight answer. Lighthouse has been here since before the highway, before the war, maybe even longer. So, a lot of diners have history. Yeah, but not all of them take people. He sipped his whiskey and leaned closer. People vanish, always have. Back in the 60s, they said it was hitchhikers. In the 80s, it was runaways. Now it's just the unlucky. And the restaurant? Still open, still hiring. My last shift was supposed to be a double. Halfway through the lunch rush, I went to the walk-in for more eggs. As I passed the back, I noticed the metal door was open. There was a light coming from it, pale, greenish, pulsing, and I heard them. Voices, hundreds of them, layered on top of each other like a broken tape. "I didn't know. Please let me go. It's still hungry. Don't let it take my face." I stepped through. I shouldn't have. The hallway was impossible, longer than the building should allow. The walls were tight, wet, humming, like a throat. The floor pulsed under my feet. The air smelled like burnt meat and old pennies. I saw movement at the far end. People, but not right. Faces melted, hands like claws, skin sagging as if gravity pulled harder in that place. Sasha was there. She looked at me with empty eyes, lips moving silently. Then I saw something pulled her backwards, fast, into the dark. I ran. I quit the next morning, packed and left town before sunrise. Denny never called. No one did. But I still dream of that hallway, of the voices, of Sasha's empty eyes. And sometimes, I swear I see the griddle houses popping up in other towns. Same neon sign, same tile floors, same greasy smell. They're always hiring. But the staff, they never stay too long. When I first drove into Milford, I thought I was finally done running. I've been chasing a fresh start for months, leaving behind bad relationships, a dead-end job in the city, and the noise that never stopped buzzing in my head. My cousin had mentioned Milford, a tiny town tucked between the hills and farmland, with a handful of stores and one gas station, quiet and safe, just what I needed. It was late afternoon when I pulled up Main Street. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The town looked like it was frozen in time. Weathered wooden signs swung gently in the breeze. A couple of old trucks were parked along the curb, their paint faded and peeling. I stopped at a diner called Milford Eats and ordered a coffee, hoping to soak it all in before finding my new apartment on the edge of town. The waitress barely glanced at me. She wiped down the counter with a rag that looked like it had seen better days, then muttered something under her breath I didn't catch. When I asked about places to live, she shrugged and said, "Don't get too comfortable." I moved in the next day. The apartment was small but clean, with peeling wallpaper and a creaky floor that groaned every time I stepped. At first things seemed normal enough. I found work at the hardware store, where the owner, an older man named Frank, was friendly enough but quiet. He'd tell me little stories about the town's history when no customers were around, always ending with a warning. "Milford looks friendly, but it's got teeth." I laughed it off. But then the odd things began. It started with news reports I caught on a crackling local radio. People disappearing, mostly young adults and teenagers. No explanations, no suspects. Then came the whispered rumors. At the diner, people spoke in hushed tones about vanishings, glancing nervously around before changing the subject. One night, I overheard a conversation at the hardware store between Frank and another man. "Another one gone," Frank said, voice low. "No signs, no bodies, just gone." The other man nodded grimly. "We're running out of time." I wanted to ask more, but the words stuck in my throat. Weeks passed and the disappearances kept happening. I made friends with Sarah, a waitress at the diner who seemed just as unsettled as I was. One night, she pulled me aside. "You need to be careful who you trust here," she whispered. "People say the mayor is involved." "The mayor? What do you mean?" She glanced around nervously. "Nobody talks openly, but he controls everything. The police, the businesses, the ones who disappear. Some say they crossed him." I felt a chill. I started paying attention to everything. The way the town shut down after dark. The way Frank stopped talking when I asked him about the mayor. The strange meetings held at town hall late at night. One night, I followed a group of men from the hardware store to an old barn outside town. I hid behind a tree and watched as the mayor stood at the center, surrounded by several suited men. They spoke in low voices, glancing around as if worried of being overheard. I heard the mayor say, "No more leaks. We take care of anyone who questions us." Heart pounding, I slipped away. The next day, a flat tire slowed me on the way to work. When I changed it, I found a note tucked under the jack. "Leave Milford." My hand shook as I read it. At the diner, Sarah was gone. No one seemed to remember her. When I asked Frank, he just looked away. That night, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I snuck into the town hall, the only place I hadn't checked yet. Inside the dimly lit building, I found a locked filing cabinet. Using a hairpin I'd keep from the apartment, I picked the lock and pulled out files. Names, photos, reports. The missing, the disappeared. All marked closed or unsolved. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Frozen, I turned to see the mayor and two large men blocking the hallway, their faces cold. "You're meddling in things you don't understand," the mayor said, voice like ice. "Milford survives because we keep order. Sometimes that means making sacrifices." Panic surged through me. I dropped the files and bolted toward the exit. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, pounding down the cracked streets under the harsh glow of flickering street lamps. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps pounding the pavement, shouts and curses echoing in the night. Turning sharply, I darted down an alley, smashing through a pile of garbage cans. My breath came in ragged gasps. They were gaining on me. I crossed the narrow bridge over the creek, slipping on the wet wood planks. My heart thundered so loudly, I wasn't sure they could hear it. Branches scratched my face as I plunged into thick woods. The moonlight barely pierced the dense canopy, leaving me stumbling blindly. The mayor's men shouted orders, the sound close behind. I tripped, fell hard, scraping my hands on the rough bark. Scrambling up, I sprinted toward a faint glow, my apartment lights. I burst through the door, locking it behind me. The pounding on the door came almost immediately. I grabbed my keys, wallet, and phone and ran to the back exit. I heard the lock break. No time. I jumped into the car and started the engine with trembling hands. The headlights cut through the darkness as the men emerged from the trees yelling after me. I floored the accelerator, tires screeching on the gravel. As I sped away, I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. The mayor stood at the edge of town, arms crossed, watching me leave like a king watching his subjects flee. I didn't look back. The fog swallowed Milford as I drove faster, the weight of the town's secrets lifting with every mile. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the echo of footsteps behind me, but I know one thing for sure. Some places are better left forgotten. I never thought a fishing trip could mess with your head until I stumbled into Barrow Creek. The town was so small it barely registered on my GPS, wedged between a swollen river and endless pines. The moment I pulled off the highway, the thick fog rolled in like a curtain. Street signs were faded, storefronts sagged under peeling paint, and the only place with any life was a rickety little bait shop on the edge of Main Street. Hank's Bait and Tackle. The sign was hanging by one rusty nail, creaking with every gust. The whole town smelled like damp wood and rot, but I didn't care. I needed trout, fresh air, quiet. I pulled into the dusty parking lot, shut off my engine and hesitated before stepping inside. The door swung open with a slow creak. Hank was there before I knocked, an old man with yellow-stained teeth and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed since the Nixon administration. His eyes were a sharp, unsettling pale blue, almost too clear for someone his age. "You're looking for bait?" His voice was a gravelly rasp. "Yeah, first time in town," I said, trying to keep my nerves steady. He gave a crooked smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Name's Hank. You won't find better worms anywhere." Inside, the shop smelled like stale fish and rust. Cans of worms squirmed in trays under flickering, buzzing fluorescent lights. The walls were plastered with faded posters of fishing tournaments from decades ago. But it wasn't the smell or the dust that unsettled me. It was the way the locals eyed me. Throughout the day, a few men drifted in and out, all sunburned and weather-beaten. They muttered in low tones, throwing glances my way, like I was an outsider trespassing where I didn't belong. One of them, a skinny guy with a crooked tooth and a worn leather jacket, gave me a long, hard look. "You new here?" he asked, voice rough but low. "First time," I said. He nodded slowly, like I'd answered a test I didn't know I was taking. "You'll learn Barrows Creek's rules quick. Best not to ask too many questions." That night, I camped near the riverbank. The water was unnervingly still, reflecting the moon like a polished mirror. Around me, the forest whispered with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant wildlife. But every time I looked up, shadows flickered just beyond the tree line. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. Every time I returned to Hank's, he'd slide a small wrapped package across the counter, heavy and cold in my hand. "For you," he said, voice low. When I tried to refuse, Hank's pale eyes would flash sharp warning. "Don't question what you don't understand." The package smelled faintly metallic, like iron and damp earth. I kept it hidden in my pack. A few days later, the skinny guy was gone. Just like that. No goodbyes, no trace. Locals shrugged it off like it was nothing unusual. But I heard whispers. He asked too many questions. At the diner, people avoided my eyes when I mentioned his name. One night, drawn by a strange pull, I followed a dim glow from the riverbank deep into the woods. There, in a clearing, I saw Hank and the other men gathered around a fire. They were tossing bundles wrapped in the same paper I'd been given into the flames. Then, the smell hit me, sharp, metallic, and sour. My heart hammered as I watched. Suddenly, someone snapped their head toward me. I froze, then bolted back into the trees, branches tearing at my jacket. Back at the bait shop, Hank waited, his smile colder than before. "You went poking where you shouldn't," he said softly. "What's in the packages?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Protection," he said, eyes gleaming. "The river demands respect." "Respect?" I whispered. "You're burning people's things." "Sometimes," he said, voice dropping to a whisper, "you have to give something back to keep the peace." I packed up that night, feeling eyes burning into my back. Outside, the men gathered in the shadows. I jumped my car, started the engine, and didn't look back. The last thing I saw was Hank standing alone in the doorway of the bait shop, watching me go with a look that promised I hadn't seen the last of Barrow Creek. Even now, miles away, I still carry that heavy package in my backpack. I don't know what it means exactly, but I'm sure of one thing. Some towns don't want visitors. Some places keep secrets that are best left buried in the dark. When my wife Jess and I decided to leave the city behind, we wanted peace, something simpler, somewhere we could raise our kid, maybe even breathe fresh air again. Granger's Hollow looked perfect on paper. Quaint houses, quiet streets, neighbors who waved. It was exactly what we needed, at first. The first week was all sunshine and new beginnings. We unpacked boxes, met a few locals, and soaked up the kind of silence we hadn't known in years. But the silence wasn't empty. It was watching. You quickly learn who holds the power in a town like Granger's Hollow. The Warners. 3 generations deep, their family controlled the land, the businesses, and the quiet that swallowed the town at dusk. Their farmhouse was a sprawling, decaying beast sitting on a hill overlooking everything, with peeling paint and windows like dark, unblinking eyes. You didn't see them much in town, but when you did, the air changed. It tightened. The Their presence was like a warning etched into the town's bones. Our first real encounter came in the grocery store of all places. I was loading canned beans onto the conveyor when a big man with a deep scar cutting through his eyebrow stepped in front of me. "You new around here?" His voice was low and rough, eyes sharp like a hunting dog. "Yeah, just moved in," I said, trying to keep my tone light. He didn't smile. "Granger's Hollow belongs to the Warners. You best remember that." It wasn't a question or a warning. It was a statement of fact. Jess later told me the color drained from her face when I told her. I tried to ignore it, focus on settling in, but odd things started happening. Max, our golden retriever, vanished one evening. We searched everywhere. Hours later, he returned, tail between his legs, covered in fresh scratches, refusing to go near the woods or the Warner property. The next night, the rumble of trucks woke me at 2 a.m., engines idled just beyond our fence, voices low and threatening. Days later, an old Warner, gray-haired, cold-eyed, showed up on our porch. "You're new. That's fine," he said without introduction, eyes never blinking. "But don't push. Don't ask questions." He didn't wait for a response. He just turned and vanished back into the twilight. The first break-in was subtle. No windows shattered, no doors forced. Just a broken gate latch and footprints in the garden. Then came the footsteps outside our bedroom window. One night I grabbed my flashlight and baseball bat and stepped into the cold air. 2 men stood just beyond the tree line, eyes glowing in the beam of my light. "Tell your family to stay quiet," one said. "Warner's watching." Before I could react, they melted back into the shadows. Jess started talking to the few folks brave enough to speak. Stories emerged, disputes, disappearances, threats that stretched back decades. People who crossed the Warners never stayed in town long. Some vanished altogether. It was a cold night when the Warners arrived at our door. 5 men, silent, except for the scarred leader. "You got 2 choices. Leave or live by our rules," he said, voice like gravel. I said no. The air grew thick with tension. For a moment, I thought it might end in violence, but they left without a fight, promising the war wasn't over. The next weeks were a nightmare. Our car tires slashed, windows shattered, threatening notes left on the porch. Every time I thought about fighting back, I reminded myself, this wasn't a war I could win by force. It was a game of patience, silence, and staying one step ahead. Jess and I debated leaving, but Granger's Hollow had sunk its claws deep. The Warners were the darkness at the edge of our lives, but it had still become our home. Some families you don't just walk away from. Eventually, the Warners realized we weren't going to play along with our rules and essentially exempt us from their hold. The rest of the town didn't understand it, how we were able to exist and not give in to their leadership. But Jess and I were never one for tyranny. We did not want to give in to bullies or people trying to suppress us. We knew what may come from disobeying the Warners, but we truly did not care. We fought for our right in that town, and we still live here to this day. Whenever a Warner comes and sees us in the city, we get nothing more than a dirty look or some whispers behind our backs. But they know we won't back down, and we will not leave. Recently, I'm starting to feel that they may have gained a sense of respect for us. We showed them something that they'd never seen before in this town. People who are willing to stand up for their right and not give in. So far, we're doing okay. But I do fear that all of this peace temporarily will lead up to a final blowout. If that ever does happen, I'll be sure to update this story. But if you never hear from me again, it may be much worse than I could have ever expected.